And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is an old friend, Dan Lier. Let me give you a little background on Dan. He's a powerful force of optimism and achievement who believes every person is capable of incredible potential. He's 6'8", so that makes him a giant in sales and leadership. And for over 20 years, he's been helping leaders and salespeople improve their mindsets and increase their productivity and performance. Dan's written several books, the first one being The 10-Minute Coach. I'm not going to get into all the other pieces here, and has done lots of other interesting things, including working with companies like Pfizer and JP Morgan and the usual suspects. But Dan's right here, so let's just dive into it. Welcome, Dan. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, so let me ask you sort of the easy question. So if I were to have found you, 25, 30 years ago and said, okay, so, what are the next 30 years like? Would the outcome would the reality look like the way you might have answered that question?
Not even close. So my background, I didn't know what I was going to do in my life. I was a college basketball player. I was blessed to get a scholarship. I'm 6'8". I got a D1 scholarship to University of Toledo in Ohio. Then I transferred to a small school in Kansas. So we won a couple national titles there, Peter. And so that was incredible. That really set my mindset for what was possible. Winning back-to-back national titles is very difficult. I had a coach that was incredible. He was my first entree, if you will, into personal development. So get this, maybe I was 19, maybe. And I'm a transfer. I'm a junior. I go to Kansas in the middle of nowhere. This guy's a great coach, but he's crazy. I'm a good player, but I'm not a great player. I'm a role player. They had finished fourth in the nation last year, and his pitch to me was, you're our missing link, Dan. We can win the national title with you, right? That kind of
no pressure.
Well, I was one of those. I don't know if you're a basketball fan or not, but you're about my age range. But if you remember back North Carolina basketball with James Worthy, Michael Jordan, Jimmy Black, Matt Doherty. Sam Perkins.
Yep.
So I was the Matt Doherty of that basketball team. I was the guy who was the Kurt Rambis guy, the guy that was doing all the dirty work, but making the good passes. But the bottom line is it helped my mindset. It changed my belief system, what was possible. We won 2 straight national titles, but I still didn't know what I was going to do after that. I wasn't good enough to go play pro. I could have went overseas some of my friends did, but I know what happens. You come back at 30 with a bunch of money and probably a couple kids and you've got no skills.
Exactly.
So I chose not to do that. But anyway, what happened to me was something that I couldn't even, think about. I started getting, my first job I got was working for an insurance company. I was selling commercial insurance. I didn't know anything, Peter. I just was doing what I do, making calls. But I started reading books, obviously. The first book I ever read was, I think, Harvey Mackay, Swim with the Sharks. And then I read Tony Robbins' book, first book. And I really dug that. And I was really vibing to Tony Robbins. And I started, it was back in those days when he was playing those infomercials with Lisa Givens and Fran Tarkington in those days.
Yeah.
Anyway, I ordered these audio tapes, 3 easy payments of $69.95. And
plus shipping and handling.
And this is back in the day. You remember this? We had these consoles where you put it in, you press the buttons. So after work every day, I'd get home and I'd put in, there was a 30-day program, and I'd put in one tape, but I'd press it and I'd take notes. I'd press pause because there was no remote control back in those days.
Right.
And I was pressing buttons and taking notes, and I implemented those tools, Peter. And I tripled my income that year. And I was the number 1 performer in the region, in a 6-state region. I was 23 years old. This is way back in the day. I made like $85,000. That was more than both my.
That was like $1 million. Right.
I bought a house. I had a cell phone in my car. I was like a pimp. Okay. It was me. But what happened was, after that, I found out somebody called me and he says, "Hey, Dan, this guy, there's a good friend of mine. He was with the Atlanta Hawks. He was the director of sales for corporate. And he had a guy come into his office to do a little motivational talk for his team. And it was a Tony Robbins guy. And he was selling tickets to a seminar. And this guy's name was Dale Hendricks. And he called me and he goes, "Hey, Dan, you got to meet this guy. He just came in my office. You got to meet him because this is what you need to be doing." So anyway, he introduced me to him. Long story short, I got a great story about how I got hired, but I got hired by Tony Robbins.
Right.
And
You were there for a number of years as a high performers part of Tony's organization, if I recall.
Yeah, we built his seminar organization. This is back before the internet. This is 94 to 2000. So we built his organization. I led his sales teams. I trained all his trainers. I led his 2 teams out there. 6 years. I lived in 30 cities in 6 years.
So let's go. I want to go back down memory lane a little bit. So back in the day, if you will, 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, thought leadership on the B2C side, the consumer side, because Tony's always been on the direct to consumer side, was very much the large arenas or the hotel rooms. And the whole model was, okay, let's get them into the arena for free or $100 or $50 or whatever. And then the next step is to click them up to the next level. Right. My firm, Thought Leadership Leverage, we don't play in the B2C space because we think it's, we don't have the skills to play in it and nor do we have the interest. I want to move this a little bit because that whole world has changed, right? The internet's changed that and the content hasn't changed. The methodology, the tactics have changed, but It's always about getting them in. Now we talk about getting them into the funnel instead of getting them into Cleveland on the 3rd or whatever. But it's really the same game, right? If I get them to spend $1 today, how do I get them to spend $5 tomorrow? We tend to focus our efforts and our thinking on the traditional B2B and enterprise space. So large organizations have a need to develop their people in a variety of things: leadership, management, sales, resilience, grit, on and on and on. And the buying side of that, even though the content might be similar in terms of the models and the methodologies and the framework of whatever's under the hood there, the buying side of that is an absolutely totally different game. So large scale enterprises don't react to, 3 payments of $69.99, right? They're sophisticated buyers and they're looking for impact and they look at things as investments and say, if I spend $1 million in what Dan has to offer, what is the impact on my business? So talk to me about that, because an individual that decides to take out their credit card on an infomercial, they're probably not that sophisticated. They want to better themselves, but they're not actually measuring, going, what is the ROI on my, 3 payments of $69? Like, I either feel better, right, which is okay, I've learned something, or in your case, wow, I've performed astronomically better. But how have you experienced the enterprise side of this, where it's really about business impact?
Well, yeah, totally different ballgame. Obviously, the people that are buying those tapes or CDs or whatever, like I used to, you're in one of 2 places. You're really motivated and you want to get better, or you're down in the bottom and you're trying to figure out what your next step is, right? So now, as we, here we are in 2021. Obviously, we got a lot of stuff going on, but my primary business is keynote talks, and consulting for major corporations. So obviously, it's a whole different ballgame because number one is ROI. What am I going to do for your company? First, can I solve your problems? Can I expose your problems? And what can I do to fix those problems?
So let me even just push there, though. So you get this, but I don't know that everybody has the understanding of the nuance at the level that you do. Is, yes, you're still in front of a room or on a Zoom with a bunch of people. However, you have 2 masters that you need to serve. The buyer of that speech for that organization. I'm the head of sales of ABC Co. and I got that together. And the butt in the seat, because if you put them to sleep, you don't get invited back. So talk about the things that you need to do to satisfy the buyer, and then what you need to do to satisfy the attendee. Because oftentimes they're hostages. Somebody else told them, you got to show up at 2:00 for this Dan guy because I'm the boss and I said so.
Yeah. Well, the buyer, I mean, that's the only focus that I have, is because if I don't get booked, then I don't get to speak and I don't get paid. So I'm going after VP of sales, CEOs, people who are hiring speakers, whether it's meeting planners, and it's a very competitive ball game now, as you well know, in this business. There's 30,000 speakers registered by the NSA that are motivational speakers, if you will. And there's a lot of speakers that aren't even in the NSA.
Well, I would say some multiple of those that are in, because it's not like it's not like being a doctor that you can't operate without a license. I mean,
that's correct. That's correct. So the point is, there's a lot of them. So what it really gets down to is messaging and how you're delivering your messaging. Because nowadays, if you don't have solid video content in my business, I'm sure it's similar in your business, you don't have a chance, because you've got the buyer has to see you. The buyer has to feel you, and they have to obviously experience you and what you're saying. So
and you are the product, and the best representation of that isn't a 1 page that says Dan's tall, Dan's great. It's, hey, let me show you a few clips. Let me show you
Right.
me in action in a Salesforce that's kind of similar to yours. Let me show you, here's another group that I worked with during a recession, and we're in let me show you a similar piece.
Yep.
So people can experience it. And I think, one of the things that we're seeing in this COVID universe that we're in is lots of speakers, and you've been at this game a long time, have awesome collateral. However, it's totally irrelevant today, meaning we're not getting together in places of 1,000 people. Well, most of us aren't, places of 1,000 people. So I've seen some people do some really wonderful, innovative, creative things, sort of redoing their reels, if you will, to show how they can have impact in a virtual world.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts.
So can you touch on that? Because I think many of the skills that work on stage, like when you take the typical, wonderfully trained speaker on stage, when they come out and there's music and everything's intentional and the rhythm's going, whatever, and you have to exaggerate your motions and your movements and all that stuff. And you try to do that on Zoom. Oh my God, you're like, whoa, that's too much. So talk about sort of showing off the digital, Dan, and then how you've had to modify and adjust your craft to be able to deliver digital.
Yeah, I mean, for me, here's what I found is that some people are good on camera and some people aren't good on camera. And that's just a skill set. I mean, it's really all about reps. So I was blessed that I have a studio that I've been, working, I work with Lightspeed. I have various courses. So I've been in front of, cameras and green screens for years. When I got diagnosed with my sickness and I was going through chemo, that's when I started doing that. So I think that, a lot of speakers have had challenges making that shift. But I think there is a big shift because, on Zoom, you're only sometimes, depending on how you do it, it's full screen or it's kind of like this sometimes, even half screen.
Yeah.
And so the way I do, I've played with a couple ways. So I'm a more of an active, charismatic type of speaker, but I'm a teacher. So I do mine with a flip chart. I do my live speaking virtual with a flip chart because I'm animated. I'm a teacher and I'm breaking things down because the bottom line is people are engaged if you're interesting, you're charismatic, and you're actually teaching them something. I think the days of
but my point is what was interesting on stage, right? So there are speakers that hold on to the lectern for dear life, right? And they're white knuckling it. Then there are speakers that that have the lab and they love to walk the aisles and walk the room and lean into people and all that sort of stuff. Can't do that on a Zoom. So going back when you started doing green screen, right? What were maybe give us a couple of tips and tricks to say, wow, these things that served me really well as a stage guy actually got in the way of my success on green screen until I needed to, you talked about reps, but you need to build different muscles, different capabilities.
Yeah, that's a good point. But back to the guy who's the white knuckler on the stage holding the lectern, he's not interesting in the start. They're not interesting in the first place.
Right.
But yes, to your point, like for me, I'm a typically an active speaker. I like to walk the stage. I'll go down, whatever, but it's not part of my routine. I do it sometimes, depending on the crowd. But the biggest adjustment I had to make was really understanding that moving with a purpose. That's an old speaking term from some great guys I've listened to in the past. So move with a purpose, but now there's really nowhere to move. It's like a step. It's like an emphasis, right? It's being charismatic within a box. And that just takes practice. It's just reps. But the bottom line is it's again, when you're thinking about leadership and about innovation, there's other tools to use. So I took that and just talking about business, my wife's in the speaking business, so she books speakers. So I know what's going on in the industry, and the speaking industry is getting crushed.
Yeah.
And so speakers are making half what they used to.
Half if they're lucky. Half is a good thing.
If they're lucky. Yeah, if they're lucky. So, one of the changes that I made to adapt is I pre-recorded 5 keynote talks on different.
Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah.
And so I created an alternative product for people who are looking for a high quality speaker that wants it now. So I created a package of what I call my disruptive keynote series, and I packaged them. And so they can buy the whole thing, or they can buy one at a time, a la carte, for virtually, I could buy all 6 of them for less than you can get me for a virtual live keynote. And the reason I did that.
No, so I love that. Yeah.
The reason I did that, Peter, is because there are companies right now that they're intimidated by the whole virtual thing. How do we do it? We don't have the technology. I mean, they're still in that place.
Yeah.
Because
there's a lot of unknowns now. It's still fuzzy. Yeah. I want to push on one of the things that you said there. So up until COVID, right, speaking was pretty straightforward, right? Here, I'm a $10,000 speaker, I'm a $30,000, like whatever, and I've got my whatever. They've had to redefine their whole value prop, because I know some, maybe 4 or 5 speakers that are still able to command comparable fees remotely. But how are you conveying to your clients that it's worth the investment, that you're delivering value, whether it's the same dollar for dollar as you were getting, flying into Scottsdale on Tuesday or dialing into a Zoom on Wednesday? What's your conversation with them like when they say, I don't know, Dad, you got a lot of stuff on video. I can just play a YouTube or whatever. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, they could have said that anyway. I mean, I've got stuff all over, but when you're looking for something that's customized and engaging. So, my typical fee is $15K when it's a normal situation. Again, if I get 7,500 right now, that's solid,
Yeah.
But back to your original point, how do you get that 7,500 or how do you get the 15? And I think that, it gets down to the leadership of the company. Some people, when they're talking to bureaus and whether I'm getting a direct lead or it's through a bureau, they have a budget to what they think is they're going to spend. Yeah. So if they go to me and they say, what's your fee? And I say, it's 15 grand, that's my fee. And so they can just say, I pass, or they can, now, as we have virtual fees. Yeah. So I set my virtual fee at 7,500 because I think that's the going price right now. And that's the game I'm playing in. And some people still aren't booking that price.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
well, the other thing I've seen people do is say, hey, it's not just a keynote anymore, right? So keynote's great. You get me for 45 minutes or not, whatever your standard thing is. But let's talk about customization. Let's talk about other pieces. So I can do some pre-work and survey your group, and I can create a custom 2-minute welcome video. And then we could, let me do my hour, and then let's come back a month later for 20 minutes. And you position it more as a package, maybe closer to the old rate. So I've seen a lot of people, I don't know what the answer is yet.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of, I'm excited about right now because it is a time where there's experimentation, there's creativity, there's innovation, and I don't know that it ever goes back to what it was. I'm not smart enough to know that, but what I do know is it ain't going to be this year, right? No. It's probably not going to be next year. And I don't think it's going to go back to the same thing where it just seems like everybody I ever knew was always on a plane 3 times a week.
Right.
I don't think we stay at 0 like we've been at almost 0 now, but I think one of the things that we've all learned is there's a lot of stuff that we can do remotely that we never thought we could. We can do, university, education, meetings. Most of us are living on Zoom these days. And if I do 1 call a week on my phone versus Zoom, I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I'm watching a black and white movie, so I think we acclimate. So anyway, as we start to wrap up here, Dan, any other final words of wisdom from the evolutions you've seen or predictions on where it's going or things that you need to do to continue to win in an ever-changing market and world?
Yeah, well, let me just wrap this up because you had mentioned, some things you can do to or some things you've heard about. And all those things you said are accurate. So some of the things I offer to get that 7,500 is, I've got a training platform at Lightspeed, so I can offer them a month of follow-up sales training on a virtual platform. So, and of course you can do the 2-minute intro, all those things. I mean, the same thing I would do in a normal package if I was looking to close it up and create value. So it's really about finding what works for that meeting planner, that CEO, that VP of sales. And because you're having that call that you have, that's your sales time to build the value on what you're going to do. So that's when you create the value. When the guy or the woman's talking to you about what are you going to bring to our team? Give me some examples. That's your sales opportunity, because that's really where you make your sale. And if your value proposition is good there, you're going to the next step. And that's when they ask about, well, can you do this or that? And it's one of those, it's a negotiation process. So you just kind of feel it out. You feel it out. But I think there's opportunity there. I think it's been an interesting situation, obviously, with the COVID. People make choices, make changes, and make adaptations. So whether it's a pre-recorded disruptive keynote series that I created, or it's just changing the way you're doing what I call your boss talk. That's what I call
Yeah.
when you're talking to your customer. So
Yep.
I think it's an evolution, Peter, but I feel like there's great opportunity there. And it's all about, again, mindset and, about being adaptive. And that's what leadership's all about.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate your time and I appreciate you sharing your story. It's a great story and glad we've reconnected recently. And I wish you all the best, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.